Okay. So next, we're just gonna have a pretty open discussion on land and water, our connection to it. What does that even mean? What is nature? What is that? We're also gonna talk about collaboration, how to properly do it between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Walter has a toolkit coming out soon. I'll have a few words about that. Yeah, without further ado, would one of you like to start?
Wonder if I could start by way of introduction. I'm pleased to be here on the ancestral lands of the Mohawk and Algonquian people. My name is Walter Andreeff. I live in Slave Lake, Alberta, which is the home of the people of the First Nations Treaty 8, as well as the traditional Métis lands that many of my people live on. I'm pleased to be here to speak to you about our land and our waters, and as well talk a little bit about beyond conservation, a toolkit for respectful collaboration with Indigenous peoples. Without further ado, I think I guess we could just discuss some of that. And I don't know if you'd like to open up the talk at all with any questions at all, Kevin, or anything to say.
Well, as I'm saying, we are a reflection of the earth.
Yeah.
The earth is, look at it, right? They show that snapshot from the moon or some space anywhere. And in this vastness, there's this little speck that we call home. And when you look at it, it's 70% water. And then the oceans and the interplay, all of that. As I said, we're participating in this sacred dance. How beautiful it is. We couldn't make it any better. Now, how do we get people to understand that we have to appreciate and love water? So that means, if we look at watercrafts and what we're doing and oceans and cruise ships, there's so much stuff that we have to start to ask ourselves, really? Because in the end, once the water is all contaminated, what's going to happen to us?
I agree. So right next to, so I live in the boreal forest of northern Alberta, and we're situated right on the lakeside of Lesser Slave Lake, which is a large enough lake that you can see it from space. And I like to spend a lot of time on the water and in the water, particularly during the summertime. Our swimming season is sort of from June to September. Before that, it's a little bit chilly, and after that, it starts to get chilly. But in there is fish that has been used by Indigenous peoples for time immemorial, and it is fed communities and sustained communities throughout time immemorial as well, both the First Nations and the Métis people who exist in that area. Many of my people have sort of come in through the Hudson's Bay Company. Our history sort of has been intermixed with the Hudson's Bay Company and with the traditional tribes of that area who would intermarry with the people who had came westward. Our Métis people are descendants of some of the original people of Red River, who went westward with the fur trade and settled out in the west for several generations. We love the land, we love the forests, and we see the changes that have come, particularly in our area, and much of the land in the forest has been developed for forestry and oil and gas removal. And we see a lot of the changes with the roads, some of the impacts to the wildlife and our traditional foods and our traditional medicines, and the removal of some of the forests. And it's getting harder for us to find moose and healthy moose. And many of the deer are sometimes affected by the lack of available food that's out there for them. Most of us are hunters. Some of us are fishermen. I have to admit, I'm not so much a fisherman, as I like to eat the smoked fish that is caught by our people, both by nets and by utilizing hooks when they go out onto the water. But continually, when I speak to the elders and those with greater knowledge than myself, I'm not an elder. They tell me stories about the old days. They tell me stories before the government came and started to regulate and started to take over the management of the fisheries and the forests from the Indigenous people in the area. In the early days, people were selectively logging just for the use of their own to build houses. So before the settlers were there, there'd be trap lines that people would have that would be passed on from generations to generations, and there would be people would live off of the land. I've heard many stories of the snaring of rabbits and moose hunting and family hunting camps that some still exist in the forest. But one of the things I should make people aware of is that in northern Alberta, I think we had one of the highest concentration of residential schools, in which they brought people down from the Northwest Territories and from British Columbia in the early days, even before the 1900s. And it affected us. It affected many of us. And we're still living that legacy today in sort of the intergenerational effects. Many of us have been pushing ahead and working in a good way, in a humble way, and looking after our elders and looking after those who can't look after themselves in any way that we can support, because we're all interrelated in one way or the other. I don't have to go very far, just have a conversation with a couple of people before we find a family connection, whether it be a generation or two back or something like that. So the stories the rich stories that come out of that area are just wonderful. And they talk about times of crossing the lake to go for picking several kilograms of berries, utilizing the berries and the fish to make other traditional foods, and just living the good life. So it wasn't always about the fur trade. With the fur trade came families and others who lived outside of the fur trade, who built, before Canada and Alberta, places like Alberta were a province. People had their own little societies where they work collaboratively and cooperatively to sort of live their life. And so that we have a very hardworking group of people up in the north, much as I'm sure as they are around here in the Indigenous communities. I wanted to say that, so I wanted to introduce a little bit about the paper. So one of the challenges that we have in Canada is how we deal with some species at risk. These are species that aren't always in danger of extinction, but are moving in that direction. And this is particularly the case with the boreal caribou and some of the caribou up north. And it's really tied into the fabric of the community through culture and practices, particularly in the Northwest Territories, but also within our area in terms of how it's been used as food and a way of sustenance when, say, moose wasn't available or deer wasn't available. So back in the old days. Now what we see now is with all the development that's taking place is that the numbers are growing smaller and smaller and smaller. And this particular, I'm part of what's called the National Boreal Caribou Knowledge Center. And there's a number of Indigenous communities who are part of this organization that was brought together by the Government of Canada to have a discussion about, well, what can we do about the caribou and monitoring? How can we reconnect with Indigenous values And over the last couple of years, and I've been working with other parts of other nations in Canada, all across Canada, to put together these guidelines and communication plans for organizations, not only companies, but also non-government organizations, to interact with Indigenous people, to get that sense of what the land is and how important it is. What we find, particularly when we're living in a more urban, more rural center, is people are very much more connected to the land and the weather. And just as I spent half my summer on the beach, and swimming in the water of Lesser Slave Lake, many of my people are out there. Also, they're out there hunting and trapping at the same time, or cleaning up, or working with their furs, and hunting moose, and treating the hides, making them ready so that they can be utilized, given away as both ceremonial, but it's also clothing and other things. I just wanted to say that the principles of the respectful collaboration really involve around recognizing the Indigenous peoples who live out there, and to respect that they have treaties, they may have government agreements that are out there, they may have historical practices that are unique to that particular community. So every community is different, and I can tell you that even within the same nation, there could be different types of leaders, different names with different leaders. I should say that if you want to reach out to an Indigenous community, you should do a little bit of homework first to find out who it is. And there's lots of ways you can undertake that. Many nations, but not all, have web pages and information, and some of them you can also find through the government has a little bit of a list of things. You can see some of the art actually of many communities in and around this area. I've been going through just walking by a few of the art stores, and I see stuff that's from some of the artists in Canada. I see some that are from artists in the East. All of that sort of ties into the values and culture of those communities. So in sort of trying to undertake a respectful dialogue and to understand and collaborate with Indigenous communities, you have to learn a little bit about them, and then you have to open the door. Part of that opening the door means that maybe you have to make a cold call to, if you're in an urban setting and you're trying to contact somebody in a rural area, to make a cold call, find out who's the person who takes care of the land, who are the people who is sort of has a role within the community to look after the land and the waters. And they may refer you to an elder at first to find out, what would be your, what's the kind of thing you'd like to try and do with the Indigenous community, particularly on communicating climate change. And just a little segue here. So where I live is only about an hour's drive from a place called East Prairie Métis Settlement. And if you saw that place in the news earlier this year, you'll find that it was mostly evacuated due to a wildfire that had taken place, and people were spread all throughout the north just so that they'd have places to stay. Many people have lost their homes. I know the community had a fire. They had a fire team to try and look after, but quite simply, they were overwhelmed. And even though they're within a municipality, so this is Alberta, that's fairly, it's got quite a few dollars and quite a few teams to fight the fire, simply overwhelmed. And so the climate is changing. And this is exactly as we've heard for quite some time now, is that particularly from scientists and from leaders in the climate movement, that the authorities will not be able to react in time. So people have to turn this around. They have to get more involved in working together to not only you don't run away from this kind of thing. We need to find ways to adapt to a new reality of warming waters, displaced people, and smoke in the air. I don't know what it was like. I know you guys got some smoke here. I could see it sort of on the picture and on the TV, but we had it almost all summer. We were either getting it from British Columbia, or we were getting it from Northwest Territories, or we were getting it from the lands right next to us. It's just the eeriest thing. I was actually standing on the, so I go to a place called Devonshire Beach, which is sort of on the east end of Lesser Slave Lake, and I'm standing there, and I'm just getting ready to go for a dip in the water, and I'm looking, and I see this cloud approaching. It's all white and dark, and it's just on the horizon. And as I'm standing there watching it, it's coming closer and closer and closer. And then the cloud kind of descends from over the Swan Hills into the Lake Valley that I'm in, and comes in, and the smoke is thick, and you can smell the smoke. You can see the ashes fall on your skin, and it actually drops the temperature. I'd say maybe a degree, maybe 2 degrees or something else like that. But it's a real phenomena, and that smoke though could sometimes go up into the atmosphere, and it goes all the way around the world. Even came to Quebec, as I believe. I think some of the fires from northern Alberta reached over here. So you can see how that travels. And I'm no doctor, but they tell me it's not really good for us. So I think there's a real need to engage with Indigenous communities, to sort of work in a way of being open and transparent with your plans and meeting up with them, to recognize that you have to have patience when contacting them, because they may not know who you are, and try to differentiate yourself from looking like a government person or sounding like a government person. Appeal to them on a human level. Appeal to them with family values. Appeal to them with the respect of their culture and understanding of where they might be. And this may take some time to kind of engage more further with the Indigenous community in undertaking programs. But there's also Indigenous groups that are sort of aligned in undertaking climate change and undertaking to address climate change, but also climate justice. Because by and large, all of those abandonments are taking place in the big cities. You notice they're taking place out in the rural areas. This is where many of our people live, is in the rural areas, and they're having to be abandoned, and it's been worse over the last 10 years. So quite a bit is happening. Well, I think I've been really encouraged by being with the Climate Reality and part of the Canada, that sort of more from the Canada Climate Project. And my very first meeting was actually held here in Montreal. Back in, about over 10 years ago with Mr. Gore. We had a couple of scientists. One of them was David Suzuki. And then, it was a very good introduction to this city and the work that has to take place. So myself and others carried that message back to Alberta. We continue to bring that message to the people of Alberta. And sometimes we're well received and sometimes we're not. That's the biggest thing that has to happen, particularly in Alberta. We need to work on the prairies with the Climate Reality and reach out to Indigenous groups who are willing to hear the message. Because what we have in Alberta is we have a resource-based industry which leads the province. Let me just put it bluntly. And reaching through to some of the communities that are intertwined in that in business, can be a bit of a challenge because we have the people who work in our communities may be working on oil and gas projects as well. And let me tell you, I meet up with them all the time, and they're concerned about what the land, how the land is changing and how the air is changing. They're concerned about their relatives being evacuated, and they don't quite know what to do. And as Kevin was mentioning earlier, we're all part of this. Just as we're driving cars and whatnot, we need to do more. We need to move faster. I kind of see Quebec as kind of a shining example of what our project, what my province should be. We should all be leaders in Canada to reducing greenhouse gases, to finding ways and means to change from where we are today, where we need to be in the future. Now I think about my grandparents, and I think about my great grandparents who were in residential schools back in the late 1800s, and I think about them going around in horse and buggy. I think about them working the soil with oxen and horses, and believe it or not, some people actually use moose. Can you believe that? Yeah, I got pictures of people who actually tamed moose to plow the land. Now, I can't see that maybe everywhere. So there's a way as means to move to this next level we need to go to. Because you remember that there was a time when there was no combustion vehicles at all. That was just over 100 years ago. So what do we need to do to change? Part of that, I believe, is getting that spirit of collaboration, finding a soul that's more connected to the land, to the stories of the land. Because everything I learned, the ways I think today, was framed through speaking with elders over many, many years. And I take in those lessons and I absorb them, and it helps me to communicate whatever message that I can to pass along to youth and to other people of my generation. And I just want to say to the youth that, just keep up the good work. Keep up the good songs that are sung. What was it yesterday? Yesterday when I was in or day before yesterday when I was Gatineau, I was watching a protest. So there's some Native people up in the north of Ontario who are concerned about the pace of development of metals that are going to be used in electric vehicles, and they want to be consulted. So right away, the government is doing the wrong thing. They're saying, well, okay, those are our minerals, but we don't really want to consult with you people. So they were all down en masse here just a couple of days ago, protesting that the government wasn't listening to them, wasn't consulting with them. Tell your governments that they need to consult with First Nations people. And we're in the case of where I live, the Métis people as well, where we're all interconnected. And so all of this doesn't take place just by wishing it. Leaders need to come up from the youth and to have a new vision for this country and the lands and the waters in which we all have to drink the water and we all have to live on the lands. And we all have to deal with its impacts when we don't look after it. You have to talk to your friends and neighbors and to utilize some of the principles that are within this guideline that we put together. And the toolkit. So much of this toolkit sort of came as a result of a bunch of nations who are getting together to find a way to save the caribou. But I think it has a broader appeal. I think it has a broader appeal to appeal in a lot of different ways, and just opening the doors to interaction with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. So I encourage people to look it up, and you can find it on Twitter, Facebook. I think we're on LinkedIn and Instagram. So if you look up Beyond Conservation and Google it, you will probably sooner or later find the links for that information. So I'm here to talk mostly about that. I like to be an applied person. I like to always find a way to make things work, try new ideas, and try and be creative with whatever whatever and work to help save our earth and save it for future generations so that we have many more generations, particularly where we're at today. Anyway, I've been talking for a while.
Well, just a couple of things come to mind. So when we were talking about the fire and the smoke, so this past June, there was a spiritual gathering that took place between the people of the Bald Eagle, the people of the Quetzal, and the people of the Condor. So essentially, North America, Central America, South America, we got together for 6 days north of Montreal. The elders, some people were saying we should have a press release, a press conference, and a declaration. Something similar to like the something similar like the Andreeff, anyway, the decision was at the end of that we're not going to do that. That when we gather spiritually, when we do sacred ceremonies, songs, and dances that are in unison with the natural world. So let Mother Earth bring the message forward. The closing ceremony was held at the Botanical Gardens on that Sunday. So each nation spoke, so they elected me to be the spokesperson for North America, which was, I told them, I know, I don't really want, but I said, if you select me to be the spokesperson, we'll do it. Anyway, what happened was a week later, on Sunday, I got up because I was driving to 2 hours north of North Bay for another spiritual gathering that I was involved with. And you know what? It's all smoke. You get up on the Mercier Bridge, you can't even see Montreal, the shore of the south. It was like that for that 9-hour ride. It was smoky all the next day. As I was driving up, and I was thinking about all the ceremony and what's happening here. So get this, because this was how I interpret it. Because I always look to nature, and I'm always trying to extrapolate what are the hidden messages. So you know how we do a gathering? Before we get together, we'll do a smudge ceremony. So now I said, here's Mother Nature. From Chicago, New York, Toronto, Montreal, all the major cities, all these so-called big ones. Now you're going to get a taste. Oh, Mother Nature is going to use her own form of smudge ceremony to try to get us to wake up about these times that we're in. So I thought that was pretty profound. And then other things are going on in the world. I mean, it's unfortunate, it's sad that people are going to have to be gone. Because anything could happen. You know, we're sitting on a volcano right now. I don't know if people know that. That dormant volcano that Montreal is on could erupt. Where people think about that? Well, that's what I'm saying. Nobody's guaranteed tomorrow. All you got is today. So just live each day like it's your last. Don't worry about it. There's no such thing as death. We are spirit. We come from spirit. We're love. We're returning to that. All of this other stuff that says be fearful, that was all manufactured so that we could be controlled. Anyway, so the next thing that comes up as you were talking, how do we get out of this? So you know what my solution is? And some of you might say, you're a little eccentric, but you know what? You got to think out of the box. Because the people that are the visionaries are not confined to the status quo. When I look at this idea of money, because it's a foreign concept, we never had that. First thing that I would do is I would get rid of it. No more money. You bring your own gift to this world. What is your gift? What could you do to make it better? What could you do? What could you do? So when there's no more money, there's no more ruling elites, there's no more rich people, but there's no starvation and famine either. we're all equal. We all prosper together or we'll all perish together. But at least we're giving everybody the opportunity from their birthright. Like we talk about this agreement that we have. We talk about one dish with one spoon. And it means that all of us at our birthright are co-equally have a right to this life. But the monetary system says, I'm better than you. I got more money than you. I'm powerful than you. I'll subjugate you. If you don't like it, we'll go to war. I'll kill you. And when you don't fully understand it, you can't do that. We're all sacred beings. No right to kill another human being. I don't care what the rationale is. You're a spiritual being. We're all spiritual in here. What does that mean? Spirit. We're spirit. We come from the Great Spirit. That's we are. People say God, Jesus, Creator. It's all there. It's in here. When people get it, you transform. Because now you understand. And every day you're happy because you're not confined to any of this anymore. Anyway, no more money. Can we do it? Absolutely. But what do we got to change? People's perception of it. Then if we ever were able to do that, so now there's no more money. So what is my job? Well, what do you want to do? Start planting. Stay home. Don't use your car. You know, there's so much we could do. But right now, because we're economic slaves, you got to pay those bills. Well, you know, Hydro-Quebec, give it to us free. You know, get out on the land, start doing things. Let's plant trees. Let's do all this different kind of stuff. If we broke out of this box, we could save ourselves. But as long as we maintain the status quo in this capitalistic system, we ain't changing nothing. Because you know what? The only way the system is going to stop is when it cannibalizes itself. Meaning that when the last tree is gone, when there's no more fish, where there's nothing, and then no one can buy and sell it anymore, well, no, we can't do that. But do we have to wait till that happens? So, you know, there was no money before. Let's get rid of it. Let's look at us as being the currency. What can you do to help? What can we do to bring everybody up? There'd be no more street people. There'd be no famine. There'd be no pollution because we won't be doing all this extracting. Those guys that are working in the fossil fuel industry must be undermined that they go to work. Look, I'm doing this. But then look at us. We still rely on them. So like the people today that were against fossil fuels and all this, I mean, I know it. But at the same time, we got to understand too that if we're saying that and we're serious about it, you better not be getting on a plane because that's burning fossil fuels. You better not be getting on a train doing all this kind of stuff or bring your car because you're saying one thing, but yet we're contradicting. That's what I'm saying. We're all in this predicament and we got to use our best thinking about how we're going to get out of it. So now I just saw yesterday Premier Legault and the Prime Minister of Canada talking about this company that's coming in because they're going to produce all of this batteries. Now, those batteries for an electric car is going to require what?
Resources.
Hydroelectric power. So you know what Legault says? We're going to start flooding northern Quebec. No, that's not even his land. Those native people that are there, did they consult? No, they already said what we're doing. Whether you like it or not, those lands are going to get flooded because the need for people is energy to supply the batteries, to charge them all up because that's what the people want. So again, you know, we're in this predicament. We're trying to say we're trying to not put our carbon out and all of that and going to renewables, but even renewables, when you do all of that, we're in this predicament. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. And the system says, you know, we got to keep on because it's all about keeping your head above water, paying your taxes, being able to survive. Well, you know what? Let's eliminate that. We didn't have money in Hydro-Quebec and we did all these other ways of doing things. We could do it. We could do it. And we have to do it because we're at stake. If we don't change what we're doing in a real dramatic way, well, that's why some people say, I'm not having kids because, like Greta Thunberg says, we keep going the way we're going, we're not going to be able to. Because mother will say, you know what, my little naughty children, I got all the time in the world. I got 4.5 billion years to return everything to pristine again. You humans, you only came into this in the last, it was like a speck. And look at what we did. And why did we do that? Because there's a reason why. And it all has to do with how we think. And humans were told, you're superior to the earth. We're us, we said, we're not superior to nothing. We're insignificant. But we got to live in harmony with that and take only what we need and work with it, love it, and be thankful and grateful so those future generations would always have happy, safe, clean, beautiful home. And we still try to espouse that, but we're not being listened to. You know, we talk about the solution. You know what the solution is? It's right here. Because in this treaty agreement, every Canadian is in a sacred contract with us. Because our ancestors said, what do we need to know about you? All of a sudden, we're leaving that land because we're tired of being oppressed. But look at this. So what else do we need to know about you? Oh, they said, we're coming with God and his son Jesus. We said, okay, tell us that story. And when they did, our ancestors said, you know what? We believe, based on what you're telling us, that we're talking about the same source of life for all life. So we shouldn't have a problem. You bring God and Jesus, we're going to bring our ancestors, and we're going to smoke the peace pipe. And we're going to travel this river of life together. But at that time, our ancestors didn't know about Pope Nicholas V, Pope Alexander VI, that decreed the papal bulls that told the explorers, when you got here, those people, if they're not the same religious belief as us, get rid of them. And that's that superior attitude and thinking that is still prevalent today. But no, here's what I say. We're in the time of the Indigenous spiritual resurrection. These 215 baby kids that spirits have resurrected up from the dead. Everybody's wearing orange. That's the color of a fire. So what's happening is we're coming to the realization that these things are happening because of nature, because of our ancestors, because of many things, and just people being waken up. So I say that this spell, true fear, that was cast to blind us, is now being lifted. And as it's being lifted up and raised, we are all coming to the realization now that we're one family, we're one mother, that we see each other in a different way, that we see that we're spiritual beings. And as a result of that, they're starting to change. So this is what I see that's happening across this land, of all of what's happening from today and yesterday about every child matters. So now all of this is hopefully helping us to start putting things back in equilibrium and balance. And it's all part of this spiritual reawakening that is happening. That's how I look at it. And it's beautiful because all of us have been called out for this particular time to challenge the establishment, to even challenge ourselves, and to say, well, you know, what is this life all about? It's just about, you know, being happy, being grateful, and try to be a helper. A lot of people want to put titles next to my name. I said, no, I'm only a helper. What could I do to help? That's all. Imagine if we all help, disperse, share, work together. You know, but it's difficult because when you turn on the news, there's so much suffering in the world. I like to put it on because I cry. you can't help when you can connect with other people on that level. To cry and be sad about pain and suffering in the world, all the war. Then the environmental stuff. Then there's diseases, there's sickness, there's all of this. So I gotta shield myself. I gotta say, I am in control of my happiness. I will determine what's gonna affect me and what's not gonna affect me. Because I could be a basket case and crying all the time. But I say, well, what can I say? Well, what can I do then to, pray for those people, to try to help, to donate, to do stuff, people I see sometimes just stop and help them, give them what little that I have. Anyway, so that's where we are. Do we go to questions? Is there time for questions?
Yeah, well, I wanted to respond a little bit about money and where that first started to come in to the West anyway. So a few years ago, I was down in Winnipeg, and as I do, I like to review historical records, particularly of my area. And I found I found, if you can believe this, the original piece of paper that a Hudson's Bay clerk had written, probably by candlelight, in 1820. And in there, I saw a report and a map that was sort of hand-drawn by that clerk on the local area. And, from I'm sure talking to the people who lived in that area, where all the tributaries were, which waterways were connected to the lake, the best routes of transport. But one of the most telling things that I saw was they listed all the employees and who was bringing in furs, listing them by name. And so back in those days, what they did was people would bring in furs and they would trade, they would get implements, they would maybe get salt, they would maybe get some other things that they couldn't necessarily get from on the land. And that's how the Hudson's Bay and the Northwesters used to, so they bartered. It was a form of barter back in the old days.
Right.
And as time went on in the 1800s, they started to develop a currency. They called it the beaver. And it had a little coin, and you can probably find them in the museums around here where they discuss some of the beginnings. And from that little beaver, it would mean a certain amount of beaver pelts. And what was happening with this beaver is that the amount of pelts would increase with one beaver, and that beaver would allow you to spend that dollar within the company store, which was there at the time. And so this was the early economy of that area. So here's my point, is that, and he brings it up a very, very good point. It's a monetary system that is kind of confusing everything, because in those days, people had what they need to live with. They were able to raise their kids. Matter of fact, they had huge families. Like even now, I think there's still large families, but not like in the old days. Like my mother, who's the last of 10 kids. They had the Métis people and the First Nation, big families, because the land was rich in game and fish, and there was water, there was places to live. People were able to resolve their disputes without most of the time not going to war. That's outside of my subject knowledge. But anyway, the point is that people could live, and families were big, and they prospered on the land because they prospered on what the land brought them for medicines and everything else. They had pandemics out there too. Back in the 1800s, people would live through that as well. They didn't quite have COVID, they had other ones. But anyway, the point was that they found the medicines to be able to live through those kind of things, even before there was hospitals out there. So we need to think about, I think we're slave to money. Let's put it as you're kind of suggesting. And we need to go back to a system in which it's more wholesome for families and economies. I don't know what the answer is, but I know it's, we've been there before, and we had a time before the internal combustion engine. There must be a way to get back to where we were in a more modern context. I don't know what that way might be. We need to turn this ship, because we're not only connected within Canada, within the economies and the development plans of the entire country. Every province has got their own plan. So what we have is we have a lot of conflict between the provinces and the feds, and interprovincially they have trade barriers with each other. So all of this is over money, and what it means to people. What it means to most people is that, particularly nowadays, is the rich get richer, and those of us who are just trying to raise families, live in a home and provide for our families and live a life of happiness. We've been kind of subjugated to that, and we're getting to a point now where it's even hard to even have a home. I remember when I was a boy, my father, who was a young apprentice in the late 60s, and my mother wasn't working. So this is a time when women didn't really work at the same time as the husband. He was able to provide on a second-year apprentice's salary to purchase a new home and raise 4 kids, right? This is a home in an urban center. So things have really changed, and they've switched around, and the country and the economies and the leaders aren't really seeing it as well as they could. I don't know what the answer is, but I think Canadians could put a better plan for ourselves together, particularly those of you who are young, who may be considering leaders and maybe run for office, whether it's municipally or provincially or federally. I think there's a chance, but we have to find new ways of doing things, and we got to get out from under this thraldom as we are under, with beholden to money all of the time. Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Not the other question.
Well, only thing that I could say is that, we all think that the government is the power. But really, power is in the people. We need to empower people. And the only way you can empower people is through education. So people need to understand. That's why I appreciate what is happening with all this now, about this, what happened with the residential schools. Because hopefully there's this awakening that's happening across the land that, will bring us to this place where we'll be able to make those systemic changes. And I said, first only thing you do is only change yourself. But if we all begin to change together, wow, and then get politicians that are not in there because of a popularity contest, but get them to stand on a value that says, what are you going to do to ensure life? Not the profit regime and that kind of stuff that is what is the engine. Well, how are you going to sustain life? What is your personal commitment? And if they can't come up with something credible, then let's change the government. Maybe what we need Indigenous elders like myself and different ones that have no hidden agenda. I don't give a damn about the money, because we are committed now to rise to the occasion and say that if need to have a government by the people, for the people, with the people, all right, well, what is the will of the people? But it has to be, as I said, spiritually based. And then get those people in those positions of leadership. And then we can be that beacon of light and hope that the world is thinking, well, we need something that's going to save us. Well, I think that we are who we have been waiting for. And we should rise to the occasion to save ourselves. And if we were able to put that type of a government in place, a lot of people are fearful because the minute you talk about Native people being in positions of power, a lot of times the first thing that comes up, oh, what are they going to do? Tell us to go back home? No, we're in a relationship. Our ancestors agreed this is how we would conduct ourselves. Well, let's do it. But let's do it with this place of brotherhood and love. But right now, there's too much superiority. We're going to tell you how it is. And then the indigenous wisdom is always being suppressed. Here's what I say. Easter comes around, you turn on the TV, what do they talk about? The greatest story ever told. Right? You hear that all the time. Well, you know what? We have the greatest story never told. Because the first thing they did is your spirituality, that's work of the devil. Well, we're spiritual people. We're connecting with all of this. We're in alignment with it. It's not wrong. So the whole idea then is if we could, change that mindset and get all of us to understand that we have to do it. So who knows? Some people ask me, they said, what do you think about the idea of, even though you're in your canoe, but this is the federal government, get people from our way of belief system in the federal government? And the more I think about it, the more I'm starting to say, you know what? Maybe I want for a prime minister.
We have a little fly buzzing around here, and I can't help thinking about that picture from way back, I think in the election, last U.S. election, when the fly kept landing on Pence's head. So anyway, I just want to say that there was another, there was a First Nations man who was in government, Elijah Harper, and when he stood up with his one feather and would not pass the accord, the Charlottetown Accord. So never doubt yourself. One person can make a difference, and sometimes the Creator puts you in an interesting spot. I know it, right? Like landing on my nose. I wonder what I got there. But anyway, the point is that never doubt yourself, and remember that if you can. Part of the growth, intellectual growth is good, but everyone needs spiritual growth, however that is for you. Right. And working the two in conjunction and being kind to others and recognizing that that the Creator will look after you as you kind of go through life. Opportunities arise in the most circumstantial ways. Right. And just like it was with Mr. Harper way back during that time, he stood up. Yeah, he stood up with his eagle feather and stopped everything cold. And this can happen to you, and you may not be around for a TV camera to capture it or anything else like that, but you can make a difference. Always think that you can make a difference. One individual. Okay, and I just want to leave it at there. Thank you.
So you can go to questions. I just want to talk to the chat room before I speak here. You can go to questions now as much in the room here in person as the Zoom. So if people on Zoom want to ask questions, just post them in the chat or raise your hand, and Michelena can get to them. So yeah, that's it. Anybody have questions off that? I have some prompted and ready if ever.
should have given it a minute, sorry. Thank you so much for your words. And I've been lucky enough to work with many people from different nations so far. I myself, my name is Nicolas. I'm from French descendants of Quebecois origin. Not much of a nationalist, but I mean, there's something to that history too. I wonder if you have relatives. I've heard stories of the Creed and Inuit about the Bay James, which you mentioned, these damming of rivers and all that. There's a lot of pride for Quebec Nation of these projects, which is what they're trying to, coast on to build more dams. But those of us who know are trying to get the word out. And when you talk about the Tuga Wampum and the resurgence of Indigenous people, I wonder, I've heard that Indigenous resistance is to be done in collaboration with non-Indigenous people, but that resurgence should be separate.
Well, I mean, we're separate just as individuals in our own particular life. You are who you are, I am who I am. But the whole thing is, we got to talk about relationship. What is our relationship? What is it that we agree on that is fundamental to life? Because we're here for this life. It's got nothing to do with language, with the economy. It's about what are we going to do to ensure life. So for us, it's ceremonies, it's songs, it's dances, it's all of that. That was tried to get suppressed, but we're lucky that we still have people that know those kinds of things, because even though we don't see it, there's intervention that happens. And I could go into many things to talk about where it's not only Jesus that said, calm the waters and the waters stop. When you see some of the ceremonies that our people do, where nature responds, that's just because you have an intimate relationship. When you have that intimate relationship with somebody, magic happens. It's not just humans, it's with the natural world too. So the whole idea is, what is it that collectively we want to see at the end of the day? And I think we all agree that the first thing is we want fresh air. I like what David Suzuki says. He says, if you think that the economy is more important than the ecology, and he says, don't take another breath. So there's where we'll decide then what is the basic fundamental of what we need to ensure. Because then it's all of this happiness and joy that comes from the natural world, because that's medicine. Go sit by the water, sit under a tree, all of that. Listen to the birds. The natural songs is what will keep you sound mind, happy. And that's what we all just want at the end of the day. Nobody wants to be sick. Nobody wants to be suffering. You want to have all of your basic needs met. And it's here. It's here in this land. Like, we shouldn't take that for granted. But then you know what happens, right? Then we get ideologies and things that say, all right, well, no. When we get into all of this stuff about language and who's who and who's what, and now where we are, those things are passe. We got to start talking about life, because that's what's important now with all of the ecology and all of things that are going on. There's bigger arguments that need to be talked about than language law and who's, because we as a human being are at stake. The entire world. I don't know if that answered your question, but
good.
Anyone else? Don't be shy. Any questions? A good question.
First of all, thank you so much. I've taken away a lot of your wisdom with me today. So today, two battles were mentioned, or two issues that I personally was not aware of. There were extractions for batteries being mentioned, and also the flooding in northern Quebec for hydropower. What is your stance on maybe the role that non-Indigenous organizations can play in garnering support or adding voices or amplifying the voices of the people on the front lines of those issues? Do you think that is appropriate? Do you think there's tactics that we can put into place so that we can amplify these issues and add bodies to those protests and make sure that the word gets out and everybody's educated, as you mentioned, because education is the key to action and solutions.
So one of the things that I see is going to happen now, and pretty soon, is that the Indigenous leadership is going to have to mobilize. They're going to have to come together as one voice. We have the Assembly of First Nations. We have the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador. We have the elected council chiefs, and we also have our own traditional governments. Now, there's issues that happen amongst these groups, just like all the different political parties that happen in the feds, between the feds, the province, municipalities, and all of that. But because if we maintain that we are stewards of this land, and we see that this is an existential threat, we got to mobilize, and we have to begin to confront it. And the way you confront it is through nonviolence, through peace, through spiritual means, and getting people to begin to try to understand what the bigger issues are. So when we start to come together, then as allies and as people in a sacred covenant with us, then either you push for what we are trying to establish, and at the same time, then, as a Canadian citizen, or however you want to turn yourself, and put some political pressure on your government. See, because when you go up and you elect these people, they're representing you. Our former chief, Joe Norton, he's passed on now, but because I'm traditional, I only participate in the elected council. But I started to look at things and I said, well, if I don't participate in that, in his mind, he's going to say, well, you're traditional, you're long nose, you don't vote. So if a decision comes up, I don't really have to validate your concern because you're not part of my so-called constituent, so to speak. So I said, you know what, that's going to change. So I went and voted. So right after election day, I meet Joe Norton by a coffee shop, and I spoke to him in our language. But here's what I told him. I said, well, Joe, I said, you know what? As we move ahead, I said, in the future, I said, when I bring things to your attention, I says, you can't validate me anymore. I says, you know why? I says, because remember, I voted for you. I'm your boss. And he gave me this perplexed look like, what could I say? What could he say? So that's the thing about government. Is they're supposed to be representatives of the people. They're not there to make these laws to legislate over you. Because then that's dictatorship. They're supposed to there to represent your interests so that you can have peace, that you can have, things met, that you can enjoy this life, but not to suppress it. And that's where they come from, this place now of ego. Because ego, then they think they're in this place of position and power, and then, well, now we're going to do this. And that's not right. So they can't just be doing Legault, there's the Andreeff, there's all of these different laws that have been passed. There's the TRC that says, you want to start talking about that land? Before you go in it, you better start to engage and start to have what they call there's some kind of consent that they refer to as
consultation with the Indigenous people of that area.
See, but again, it's just top down.
Prior consent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if I could just interject here for a minute, you may know the story better than I do. It's sort of Matthew Kuhnkamp on his impression and everything that he did to change the direction of hydro and the water use and dams up in northern Quebec, in which he actually took a canoe and brought canoe down to New York State and changed the mind of a governor.
Right.
And so that they said they changed the contract with Hydro back in the day. I don't know the full thing, so maybe you can elaborate on that. But what I'm trying to say here is that it wasn't probably just the Indigenous nation. It was a cooperation of working with others that helped make all of that work, in which Quebec Hydro had to change its mind. So I'm gonna flag this toolkit as a way of trying to build allies and interactions with the Indigenous people of that particular area, and realize also that within those communities you'll have different groups as well. You know, you'll have those who are those who want the overall health of the land and you know, the waters, and you'll have those who may be interested in economic development and how that may be impacted or not by the proposed projects. And then you'll have people who just want to live their lives, and you know, don't want too much muss or fuss kind of thing. So you know, it's part of that is sort of the research you do in advance. But if you know anything, you know, knowing you as I do, maybe you know some of the more of the story of.
I only know it like you. I don't know all the particulars of it, but for sure though, with all of these things that are happening, you know, like my daughter, she's the Grand Chief of Ganawagi. I don't know if you know that, but you know, she's busy doing a lot of things and all of that. But there was just a AFNQL Chiefs meeting, and some of the things that I talked about was the solution is right here. No, whether the governments are going to, they talk about it. But again, you know, if Legault and these ones were serious about reconciliation, they would have said, before we even make that announcement, we should have talked to the native people about this land, that their territory is going to get flooded, and get their opinion. Not only their opinion, but they be engaged in it. And because nature is already being, you know, under all of this stress, you know, they're talking about the moose population and all of that. Now, how big of an area did they got to flood again? You know, when the LG1 or LG2 went through and all of that, they said that the land that they flooded and had to move the trees and all of that was the size of France.
Yeah, and the water became impure.
Absolutely. Yeah. See, so then who talks on behalf of the trees? Who talks on behalf of the bear, the moose, the caribou? That's why I said, people, they think that it's just us, that we're alive, but all those other things, trees have feelings, for crying out loud. But people don't look at it. That the English language, it makes things animate and inanimate. You know, I was when those people came up from South America, and we did all the ceremony. You know, here's something that you'll think is a little bit absurd. But they said, you know, that even rocks have sex.
I haven't heard this. I'll be interested in that.
So we look at it, right, and we think, oh, a rock.
Well, listen, I'm open to new things.
But the thing is, we go into a spit lodge, those are grandfathers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You know, when they say, we say to them, you know, how many snows have you seen? How much knowledge do you have to help me, pitiful me, that came into this life in just a very short period of time to give me knowledge, teachings, wisdom, understanding. And then you go back into the womb. Because that little split lodge represents the womb. Absolutely. You go into the womb, it's moist, it's wet, it's dark, it's hot. But then something had to happen. Those grandfathers come in because that's the great mystery. And then you humble yourself, cleanse yourself. You ask that whatever thoughts, actions, words I did, help me to cleanse that so I can, when I come out of this womb, I'll be born again. And I get the opportunity to go and do and well, that's the Sweat Lodge ceremony. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it or know of it, but it represents the womb. You go back into the womb, clear your slate, come out born again. But all of that is all tied with this life. and rocks.
Absolutely it is. Yeah. It's been a while since I've had a sweat, but it's really I would say a like for me it was a life-changing experience in speaking with the grandmothers and grandfathers and the kind of for me visions that would come to me when I was sweating with the Blackfoot people in southern Alberta. So it's been a while.
And then even the stories about how those ceremonies came.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the one particular story that I know, a little boy got fed up with the adults arguing about whatever. And you know, that's why they said whenever you have kids, never argue in front of them. Never let them feel that there's this animosity because they're gonna think, well, I caused it. You know, if we look at how, as a parent, even some of the dumb, stupid things that I did, but we didn't know any better because you know why? Kahnawake is a Christian community, predominantly was. I mean, it's changing now. But the adage or the attitude was what it says, the so-called book. As the book says, if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. So you take the belt off, you whip your kids because, hey, that's what it says to do. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought now where I was going with this deviated. Where was I? I went to make a point. What was I just saying about
Talk about Kahnawake, spare the rod.
oh, so we were basically like a Christian community.
Yeah.
But
So before that, we were talking about sweats.
oh yeah. So the sweat lodge. So this whole idea about to be born again.
Yes,
So yeah,
that's right.
so we go back into the womb and there's all of that healing that goes on. Okay, so here's where I was. So now the story. So the little boy gets fed up and he goes into the woods walking. He's young, maybe 5 years old. He doesn't understand the woods, the forest, how to. So what happens? He gets so hungry, he's thirsty, and all that, he passes out. And while he passes out, his spirit is taken to the skyward. And where the crescent moon is, when you see a crescent moon, like if you study the moon, right? There's a new moon, it's dark. And all of a sudden you see the phases of the moons, and then you're going to see it starts the first quarter. So that crescent, thought it was a star. And that little boy's spirit was taken to that doorway and went through that doorway and went into the realm of 7 grandfathers. And the 7 grandfathers give those teachings. And then they said, okay, go back now. So the little boy wakes up. He's got the shade of brown and blood, and he's got all of this knowledge. And the little boy goes back to his parents and said, you're not going to believe what happened. And he tells this fantastic story. So they start to build the lodge, and they do all of this stuff. And that's one story about how the Sweat Lodge came to heal and help the people. And a lot of times, all of these stories that we have happen as a result of little children that get so disillusioned with the adults because they're so messed up. And they're pure and they want something different so that something happens. And then they come back. Just like us, we talk about the great law of peace. You all know us talk about that. Well, with the peacemaker, when he was born, he had all this that he had to deal with. And right at the outset, his grandmother wanted to kill him because he thought that, oh, I don't want this boy. But then he grows up and he has all of this. But what he did was he worked with his age. He didn't work with the youth. But eventually it started. And then we talk about that ancient story today, but it starts out with something. And usually the younger, the better, because they're more pure. Us in old age. I mean, we could change and all of that, but we don't make as much of an impact when, we're more young and sweet and more have that ability to cause change.
You're on chat. For sure, you guys.
Come on, Jamie, you can spice it up.
Yeah, regarding days like today, youth is children are focused food. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about that connection to land and water, how it influenced you. What is the contrast or difference do you see in how it's affecting youth today? Is that connection to land and water the same? Is it something built in? What does it look like in your communities?
Well, I went to Standing Rock. Orville Lochinghorse, one of the, as I said, spiritual leaders that carries that sacred bundle from White Buffalo cattle. And what were we going up against? Well, we refer to it as the black snake, the pipelines. So if you look at Standing Rock, how much of the, what I say, that reverberate across the land about, you see a teepee and the U.S. Army's finest, I don't know what you call that, like an army truck with all of the, everything on it. Like, that contrast. Or, there was one woman there, she's on her knees, she got an eagle during one other thing that had happened in Quebec. I forget what that issue was, but it was something again. But the thing is, we're trying to get it out in many ways. It's not just about the land, the water, it's all so much stuff. Because as adults, we get into a mindset or a way of thinking and doing and all of that, and we think, well, this is it. And the hardest thing, and I've been a school principal, I know about how when they talk about if you want to ever implement change, you're always going to get resistance. The naysayers, people don't want to get out of their comfort zone. People do an example that says, well, fold your arms the way you're accustomed to. So now I'll do it the other way. And I even can't do it. But you get so accustomed to doing it one way and you try to do it the other way, I can't do it. But because, we get so in a certain way of doing things. So everything is, how would I say, at a crisis about how we look at it. So the water, even the air, because if we truly say, like, I love this sacred breath that I take, but then every time I turn my car, I'm putting this sewage into the air. So what could I do? So I got a hybrid. I mean, I like it when the little green light comes on, EV. So it means the engine shuts off and I'm not using no fossil fuel, I'm using electric. I mean, but even still in the bigger scheme of things, that's not a solution either. So all of the things, when we look at our bodies, our relationship to water, our relationship to the soil, all of these things are under attack. The food that we eat, everything is, got some type of manufactured way to it. Look at artificial intelligence, other different kind of things, because humans come up with ideas and there's no bridle that says, maybe we shouldn't explore this. They let the genie out of the bottle. Now we can't get it back in. And that's happening in many, many areas. So what I say is, as much as possible, just get back to nature's way. Nature's way has been tried, true, and tested. We don't know how long. We came in just in little, and we're saying, oh, we're going to change it because we know better. Well, nature says you can, but you know what? I'll eliminate the playing field. I'll reduce it to nothing, and I'll return it back to how it should be 4.5 billion years from now, and we'll start it all over again. And hopefully, humans will have learned that we should maintain this intimate, loving relationship and not push our bridges too much, because we learned our lesson.
Yeah.
So the way Métis people always had a connection to the land, not only through the work that they undertook, but also living on the land. one of the things they love to do way back in the old days is families would establish themselves near the rivers, and they would have river lots that would be set up. And back in those days, if you can imagine, they used lengths of measures called chains to determine the width of your lot and how far back it goes. So what would typically happen is that, you know, people would have, you needed the river frontage because, well, that's how you traveled, right? But there would still be room at the back end of the property to be able to, you know, where they would be interlinked, say, through a cart track or where they had their horse and carriage and that kind of thing. So the families would utilize the river, and they would build their homes or cabins near the river, but, you know, a comfortable distance so that if it flooded, well, they're not going to get washed away, right? And then at the back end, they would build their gardens. They would provide for themselves and provide for their families. So that was the old ways. Sort of, you go back into the 1800s, but by the time Canada became a country, it was starting to think about how they could undermine all of that. So what they did was, and I'm not even sure if the old river lot system, it might have been a construction or development of the French, maybe back in the old days. I don't know that, but I'm suggesting that maybe that's how it was. But so when Canada came in, they came in with a British measuring system. And at that point, they started to take away the land from the people. And they would make their little blocks and everything else, and all of a sudden somebody's river lots reduced down to zero. Or then it became, and they would find ways within the government to remove that land from the people. And matter of fact, even into the 1900s, Father Lacombe was looking after a lot of Indigenous people, First Nations and Métis alike, formed a little community called St. Paul de Métis. He set it up for them so that they could farm off the land and make a living and to provide for their kids. When after Alberta got formed, it took another 20 years, but they evicted everybody from those lands and took them over and made them kicked out the Indigenous people and made them lands for settlement by settlers. And that's why we had quite a few people who were called the road allowance people. But, you know, we still, doesn't matter. We still have that connection to the land. We love the land. We love the bush. We love the nourishment it gives us. We want to get back to that land. Matter of fact, we want some back. We want some of that old land, and we're getting it back bit by bit by bit. But, you know, we're still subjugated to the rules and regulations and requirements of the provinces who exist on a period, not on a spiritual level, but again, part of this slave to the money and land system, which casts us off of our lands in the first place. So it's integral to us and how that is. Not only in the rural areas, but, you know, even in some of the towns and cities, that kind of thing. And if you look at old maps of this city, I bet you'll find quite a few river lots. Same with Winnipeg, you know, and I can look back and see some of my ancestors that lived on the river lots back in what is now known as Winnipeg. So that's an integral part. So the water. In the old days, it was the rivers of the nation. And for example, the voyageurs would take months, but they would go back and forth with furs twice a year. I know my family, I can point to my ancestry that we were voyageurs. And we used to be on part of the brigade that would bring supplies back as well as furs the other way. There's many times I stand on a riverbank and I'm looking down the river. I can almost see them. It's like you know it within your blood that was a natural place for your people, and it's where they not only got sustenance from the river, but also it was part of the commerce. It was part of the song of the early parts of Canada. You know, even here, the log driver's waltz and other songs of of the history of Canada. And you know, we need to go back to those kind of things. and you know, maybe not. Obviously, we can't turn back the clock, but there's ways of thinking about our land and our relationship to the land and the water, rather than to exploit them, but to use them in a more wholesome way, rather than dam it. Like we have the same situation of, yeah, they're building a dam called the Site C Dam, just up in northeastern BC, which is just right across the border from Alberta. Again, the province, you know, made like they were engaging with Indigenous people, but not really consulting with them. And what did? They built the dam, much to the dismay of, I'll say, West Moberly First Nations, for example. They're concerned about the fish, some of the poisoning that may happen with the fish because of the dam waters and the logs rotting in the water. So you know, we have to. Canada has to move beyond just developing for development's sake, but to develop for the health of the people and the land and the waters, because we're all interlinked. We're tied together. We you know, we can't separate. We, as much as we'd like to separate ourselves with money, you can't eat money.
That's right.
Yes. So
We had one last question, I think, on the chat, right?
Yeah, it's very hard. I'll just computer so that there's no feedback. Otherwise, it'll be terrible for everybody.
Hello. If you can hear me, can you hear me? No? Oh, we can. Okay. Oh, first of all, thank you, Walter and Kevin, for sharing your wisdom and your experience. I'm curious to know your thoughts on self-governance, the importance of self-governance when it comes, because you're talking a lot about the need to listen to First Nations people, and there needs to be a respect for that voice. Otherwise, you get trampled upon with your experience. The story you're talking about, the Quebec government just sort of cavalier attitude towards a new dam. I'm going to be going back to Sioux Valley Dakota Nation on Tuesday. I'm calling from Winnipeg, by the way, from Treaty 1 territory. I've gotten to know and work with people in Sioux Valley Dakota Nation in Western Manitoba, and they have a unique experience because they are not a treaty nation. They never did sign treaty, and so they've been recently entered into a new agreement where they have unique self-governance situation, and as a consequence, they're undertaking a lot of really innovative and respectful projects that are in alignment with their traditional values. Because of that ability, that power that they've got over their own affairs. And so they're undertaking things like any farming on their land has to be done without certain chemicals, and their respect for, or their projects for capturing wind and solar for their energy sources and things like that. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about the importance of self-governance and therefore self-determination amongst First Nations, so that it's more of a peer-to-peer, so that we can put the proper level of value on the knowledge that comes to us from First Nations.
Well, as a member of the Longhouse, I do belong to a sovereign government known as
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Confederacy. You know, when Trudeau created the Constitution and brought back the Constitution Act of 1982, Section 35(1) talks about that existing Indigenous treaty rights are hereby entrenched. Well, our government said, you, Canada, you can make any constitution you want, but we will always be independent because we're in a special treaty relationship with you. Now, so what are the implications of that? Well, if your rights are interpreted in Canada's Constitution through their Supreme Court, it means that at the end of the day, you can say that you own this land or you're sovereign, but the government says we determine that. So when we're talking about self-government, we got to be careful then about our approach and how we're going to sit and negotiate. I'll always maintain that my sovereignty comes from who I am. My language, my ceremonies, my creation story, my history, my song, my dances. It's like this. It's not top down where your laws or your courts. But if other people want to take that road, that's okay, that's fine, because everybody has their own unique history about how they want to engage and what their perception is as a self-government. Our government will always maintain that we are in an equal relationship with the Dutch, with the French, with the United States, with Canada, and even our own people, because we did make alliances with our own people that said, this is all this, one dish, one spoon. We all co-equally have a right.
Miigwech.
So I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the Métis Nation of Alberta. So we've been moving towards a self-government, having been an association that formed back in the 1920s. We've been lucky to engage we've been lucky and working hard to engage our citizens, and we actually put together a constitution that was voted on by 15,000 of us last November. And when we put that forward, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of engagement with our citizens around the province. And I should say right now our numbers are a little over 60,000 members of the Métis Nation of what we call now the Otipemisiwak Métis government. Otipemisiwak is sort of another word, is a Michif word meaning the people who rule themselves. So we did the Constitution, undertook the Constitution vote, and we had 96.7% of those who participated in the vote voted to accept the Constitution. And so we had a great engagement. We had, it wasn't even a 50-50. Everybody said, go ahead with it. So that's exactly what we've been doing. I sit on the transition committee, which is sort of a circle of people who have been around in the Métis Nation for a long time, the Métis Nation of Alberta. And we became the Otipemisiwak Métis government on the 19th of September. So it wasn't even that long ago. We still have some more work to do. The transition is going to take place. We've been drawing up the laws of government, how people would vote, what constitutes membership, how it breaks down from sort of the overall government into the districts, where all throughout Alberta, all throughout the province of Alberta, what their roles are. We don't have we usually had a president, vice president. We don't have that anymore. We have a president and we have a citizens council who sort of govern the overall provincial thing. And then we have what we call captains who are sort of in charge of the districts around the province. So to us, self-government is an empowerment to allow us to run our own governments in our own way, run our social and health programs in our own way, working in concert and collaboration and cooperation with both federal and provincial governments, but also to assert our rights or to protect our lands, protect our waters, which is, as I mentioned earlier, also treaty lands. I think it'd be great if we can continue to work together with First Nations people and Métis settlement people who actually live not all that far from us as well, to start to take more care of the land. There's a lot of talk about, and I agree with this, talk about getting the land back. Land back is a saying that many people in my community are talking about. and we need to get back that land because it's not doing well. And but I do appreciate the question, and I think self-government for Indigenous people is the way to go. But more so, also allow us to have a collaborative relationship. And as Kevin's suggesting, why not have more elders involved in government? Why not have more Indigenous people sitting in government? Why not allow a different breadth of appeal that looks outside of the system of where we're stuck in regarding monetary measures as a value system? And let's find a value system that's more wholesome for our society as a whole. And I think the climate movement is part of that. Let's continue to move that along, and I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
English.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Good.
that'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Elder.
Yeah, maybe one last part of round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. I know you have an event to run too. And got someone's actually giving the ceremony at the March at 1 o'clock last part, if ever you guys could.
Yeah, and we're catching a ride with him.
Yeah. Thank you guys. So our caterer is running a bit late. Kind of thing that's out of control. But what we could do now is take a small 10-15-minute break to give her time to arrive. When she sets up, we can serve food. And after that, we have the rest of the day planned out. There's going to be a poetry workshop, and my other is going to give a poetry workshop at 12. But yeah, so for now, let's take a quick 10-15 minutes. And when she arrives, you guys can serve yourselves. Thanks for being here.
Who do I hug today?
Everybody.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I will offer the room. It's so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for